This is the captain speaking. There's an imposter aboard the ship. A man who looks exactly like me and is pretending to be me. This man is dangerous.
Enemy Within was written by Richard Matheson, who's perhaps one of the great science fiction writers of that era or this era. I Am Legend, a big hit film based on his novel. He also wrote a huge number of the original Twilight Zones, so that was just a great sort of training ground to come out of.
Richard Matheson wrote probably the most famous Twilight Zone episode ever, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, starring William Shatner.
For The Enemy Within, again, it's that classic story of the divided man, the divided person.
The Enemy Within falls into a literary category that would include Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, in which, in theory, each of us has a dark side and a good side, and gets separated.
Jim, you're no different than anyone else. We all have our darker side. We need it. It's half of what we are.
What's so good about it, in a sense, it's related to The Naked Time, because it gives us a chance to look inside the character of Captain Kirk, the hero of the show.
And that polarity in the character of an evil side and a good side, both of which were mirrored in Spock, made that a very rich one. It's a very, very strong script.
There's some great firsts in The Enemy Within. It's the first time we see the Vulcan nerve pinch. It's also the first time we hear McCoy say, "He's dead, Jim."
He's dead, Jim.
The other thing about this episode that's kind of fun for fans is there's some great continuity clangers. When Kirk beams up onto the transporter pad, he's missing his insignia. The shirts had gone out to the dry cleaners. They came back, they didn't have them on, but they put them on, nobody noticed. And later on in the later scenes, the insignia is back on. The other thing is near the end, when Kirk, the mad Kirk, the aggressive Kirk, is on the bridge and he's got the scratches, the close-up is reversed and the scratches all of a sudden are on the other side of the face. Presumably that was an editorial choice, so the sight line of the actor matched up the previous shot. But for fans watching, it's something they've noticed from almost day one, that all of a sudden, wait a minute, those scratches were over here, now you're telling me they're over here? You know, sometimes when you're watching a movie or a TV show and it happens so quickly, they hope you don't notice, but most people did in this case.
So, you know, we look at this episode today, and remember the Star Trek episodes of the original series. They were designed to be seen on a little tiny black and white, if you were lucky, a color television screen once. There was no sense that anybody was going to be watching them 100 times, freeze frame, look for the detail in the right-hand corner. And so we look at it and we see this little dog in the costume and we go, oh, isn't that quaint? But the story holds up and the episode holds up and the series holds up because at its heart, Star Trek was about those characters.
I think the fans really locked into The Enemy Within because William Shatner is able to show a wide acting style. For a long time, I don't think that people knew that Bill is very much a comedian. And he was able to put into the soft side things that he hadn't been able to do before in Star Trek, and then also show his rough and tumble character on the other side.
Lieutenant Kirk! I'm Captain Kirk!
Turnabout Intruder uses a classic science fiction idea, the idea of swapping minds. And in this case, it's also helpful for Star Trek because it's inexpensive. This was the 3rd season of Star Trek. It was the last episode. Budget had been cut for this season. And the beauty of this is that you have the actors portraying different versions of themselves with no special effects and no makeup demands.
But this is often what the actors love, because then the attention goes back to them. It's not on special effects or makeup or costume. It's them having to pick up the mannerisms of the other actor and create the image of that actor within a different body. In this case, with the scientist and Kirk switching bodies, Kirk had to wake up in a female body, and the female was waking up in the captain's body. This would have been just fine, except this was also 1969, and in contrast to almost all of the rest of the portrayal of women in Star Trek in this original series, they reverted to 1969.
Violence by the lady perpetrated on Captain Kirk, I asked the assembled personnel to look at Dr. Janice Lester and visualize that historic moment.
That did lead to the very last line that was ever uttered in Star Trek on that episode, since it was the last aired. And it's Kirk, as Janice Lester, the scientist, is taken away, sick and broken, to be looked after by a man. And he's saying, she could have had as rich a life as any woman, if only, if only.
I'd like to take care of her.
Her life could have been as rich as any woman's. If only. If only.
And it was just a classic line to go out on. But I prefer to think of it as probably it was just another portrayal of the many versions of women.
Star Trek as a series, in terms of the ideas, was definitely ahead of its time. And as in terms of its ambition and what it wanted to present on screen for special effects, things that we take for granted today where computers can create almost anything, back then they had to do it through a very labor-intensive and very expensive process of individual shots and matting things together.
So on an episode like Turnabout Intruder, when they wanted to show the switching of the personalities of the two people into their opposite bodies, they very simply put them against the wall, locked off the camera so that it wouldn't move, and then shot pictures of the actors, which they could then, in a sense, make double negatives of and place them against it, do a little film processing, and there it was.
Today we might do something with electrical sparks shooting behind their heads, but back then that was an expensive effect. It was time-consuming, and Star Trek was always under the gun in post-production schedule. In fact, in the first season, that was the trouble they ran into. They hadn't anticipated just how long it would take to do all the special effects.
In Frame of Mind, the alternate reality is one that's kind of imposed on the character rather than some technological breakthrough, some kind of time shifting or whatever. It's basically he's being administered these psychotropic drugs or something. And that is what's causing Riker's alternate reality.
In Frame of Mind, we were stuck in the room with the entire writing staff, and it was one of those, we'd been in there way too long, and everybody was getting short-tempered and angry, because nobody could make the story work, because Brandon had this great idea about Riker in an insane asylum, and there was something really interesting about that. He wakes up in an insane asylum, and how to get there.
Brannon Braga made a great career out of writing these dark episodes that kind of explore the hidden layers of the human psyche.
Sometimes it's healthy to explore the darker side of the psyche. This is becoming more than just a role to you.
Maybe you're right.
I just had this sort of notion, what if it's a play? What if he's working on a play? And because we established that they were all actors, or little, amateur actors on the Enterprise. And what if it's a play? And what we do is we use the play as the device that's going back and forth. And he's in the play, and then suddenly he's with the doctor, and he's in the asylum, and which is reality? And he's not sure which reality is, and he keeps sliding back and forth. And then everybody sparked to it, and there we went.
Frame of Mind, like a lot of the good alternate reality shows, is basically a mystery. The characters are trying to find out what's going on. Things are not right in their world, their reality.
Don't let them tell you you're crazy.
And so for the fans, us watching, the viewers, and for the characters, it's just one big mystery where we've got to peel the layers back and find out what's going on. Ultimately, Riker does this in Frame of Mind. And he kind of shatters the illusion that's been set up for him by these people on Talonis 4 who captured him when he was on an undercover rescue mission.
It's my favorite Riker episode. No spacesuit. Act as wild as you want. Everything was a little bit askew.
No!
Shattered started with an image I had that I'd scribbled down on a yellow Post-it note And the image was essentially of a person, a man who was sort of old on one side and young on the other. And I thought, oh, that's a cool image. I don't really remember seeing that before. How could that, how is that an episode? Well, that image actually ends up, it's the final shot of the teaser of Shattered, where Chakotay gets zapped by space lightning and falls down, and you see him very briefly, and he is all aged on one side and normal on the other. After getting that image, I was trying to think, well, okay, the idea of a person split in time is kind of cool. I don't know what it means, but what if the ship were split in time? What if each deck was a different year? What would that be like? Now, scientifically, it makes, zero sense, but it sounded like a cool story idea. The concept of the idea is that the ship is split into all these different time zones, and Chakotay is really the only person who can travel through all of them without any trouble. So there are moments where he's, walking with Janeway or walking with another crew member, and this other person just, Chakotay, from their perspective, would just disappear. He's vanished into thin air when, in fact, he's really just crossed a time boundary and is in another era. The future and the past, you don't quite know.
We've moved into a different time frame.
Scan the area, but don't go past that bulkhead.
It was a great 7-season show where you could go back and bring back characters like Seska, who had died many years before, and bring back that actor and sort of revisit that conflict. And in some ways, it's sort of a clip show without doing a clip show. And bringing back Captain Proton. I mean, often when you're doing these time travel and alternate reality shows, you have people meeting themselves, and you have a lot of, it's very intensive in terms of special effects. Shattered, because it was a ship-based show. And that's one of the good things about some of these alternate reality shows. Often they're set on the ship, so you can. All that money that would have gone to an alien planet or guest stars or whatnot, you can pour into the visuals and make it a really cool, exciting adventure.
The Delta Quadrant is a death trap.
It's a little presumptuous to think you have the right to change everyone's future.
It's worth the risk.